Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Truth and Inspiration Artist Showcase. My name is Janice Liebenberg, and I am the Vice President of Equitable Arts Advancement for ArtsWave. Thank you so much for coming out today. This showcase is the culmination of work by 22 artists as part of ArtsWave's Black and Brown Artist Program. You will see work throughout the museum today. In fact, yesterday we unveiled the visual art exhibition in the Ship Gallery, so if you have time, please check that out. Today, we will have quite a few live performances, and then come back tomorrow for a film festival right back here in the Fath. I just want to thank a few people. First of all, the Cincinnati Art Museum, thank you so much for hosting us today and throughout this weekend. We are also partnering with the Cincinnati Museum Center and the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center to give a stage to our 22 artists so that more people can come and appreciate and celebrate the work by these artists. I want to thank our sponsors. Big thank you to the City of Cincinnati, Duke Energy, the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, Fifth Third Bank, the Jewish Foundation, Hard Rock Casino Cincinnati, and of course, Cincinnati Children's Hospital and Medical Center. Now, you're about to engage with Asha the Artist, and let me just quickly share a little bit more about Asha. As a self-educated and community-engaged artist, Asha the Artist explores themes of race, sexuality, and mental health in her work. She holds a bachelor's in communications, a minor in women's and gender studies, and a certificate in public relations from the University of Cincinnati. And she's in the process of obtaining her master's in art education from UC's DAP program. Her project, Mood Altering, features, so there's multiple facets of her project. So her project, called Mood Altering, features 25 portraits and audio clips of Black Cincinnatians reflecting on the impact of racism and historical memory on mental health. So if you're able to make it to the gallery, the Ship Gallery on the second floor, you check out her 25 portraits. Please bring headphones or earbuds, as you're able to scan a QR code to listen to the audio clips. But today, Asha has a panel. She assembled a panel for you, and I will let her introduce the panel herself. Everybody, hand of applause for Asha.
All right, everybody, I just want to thank you so much for showing up today. Like I said, as people were trickling in, I would have been so happy if one or two people showed up. So to see the room full of your beautiful faces, I just thank you today for taking your time. I also want to take a moment to thank our panelists here with me. We've got one person there. Like I said, we're going to keep it casual. We have one person that had a little car trouble today, so hopefully they'll be joining us in just a few minutes. And I'm going to introduce my panel shortly, but I just want to thank you all so much for taking the time out of your day to come talk about this topic. I also want to thank our project sponsors, so ArtsWave, for the funding of this project. I also want to thank Black Art Speaks. Black Art Speaks is a Black arts collective that is for promoting and uplifting African American artists. And I'd also like to thank the National Alliance on Mental Illness of Urban Greater Cincinnati, which is a grassroots organization advocating for mental health issues through public policy and legislation, also for sponsoring this project. So thank you so much. All right, and so if you haven't already, like Janice said, please do stop up to the gallery and see the work. I'll be having some, when we're talking, I'll have some of the images going across the screen. However, it's just a few samples and it's nothing like the impersonal impact, so I really do hope that you have an opportunity to go upstairs, bring your headphones, and really immerse yourself in these stories. So, all right. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of context about my work. So Mood Altering expands the Moody Monday series. So for 16 weeks, I had a series reflecting on my mental health and mood. But this project expands it by incorporating Cincinnati, African Americans in Cincinnati. I interviewed 50 Cincinnatians about their experiences with racism, access to mental health care, historical trauma, and mental health in the Black community. And 25 participants were selected for this installation of the work. So I plan to continue to expand the work. So if you would like to donate to the expansion of this project, you can find that on my website at ashatheartist.com/mood altering. You'll also find it when you scan the QR codes. Photos and audio capture participants' thoughts during the interview, and participants then created abstract paintings using symbols to represent their feelings. This work combines their photos, interview audio, and artwork to produce new original works of art. So I'm going to go ahead and get into introducing our panel here today. So we have a dynamic panel of speakers that I know are going to provide key insights into how racism impacts mental health from a clinical perspective, systemic and structural racism and its impact on mental health in the Black community, and then what advocacy groups are doing and what we can do as individuals to help make a change. So I'm going to start first up with Talisha Dorsey. She is the owner and lead therapist of Serenity Therapeutic Services from the University, lost my place there. Talisha received her bachelor's and master's degree in social work from the University of Cincinnati. Talisha has experience working with children, teens, and adults who may struggle with life transitions, trauma, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, ADHD, anger management, maternal mental health issues, diagnoses, dual diagnoses, and more. Talisha is passionate about helping others elevate and experience breakthroughs. The Canton, Ohio native is excited for conversations about mental health to become less of a taboo topic. And it's exciting that more individuals are willing to invest in their mental health. And I would agree with you there. I wanted this conversation just to break down any stigmas around mental health. All right, next up we have, Shanique will be joining us shortly, so we'll come back to her. But next we have Brandy Blessed. Brandy Blessed, PhD, is an associate professor in the leadership and management area in the Hubert H. Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Blessed has developed a reputation as a socially conscious researcher, administrator, teacher, and community partner. Her personal ethics has always been at the center, the lived experience to offer more robust insight by those directly impacted by administrative decisions. All right, next up, we have Tia Cherie Gaynor, PhD. She's an associate professor in leadership and management at the Hubert H. Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. Prior to joining the UMN faculty, Dr. Gaynor was associate professor of political science and founding director at the Center for Truth and Racial Healing and Transformation at the University of Cincinnati. Tia is a community-engaged scholar immersed in equity and inclusion. Her work explores the intersection of social justice, local government, and identity. More specifically, focusing on the ways identity-based narratives, negative social constructions, and decision-making lead to inequitable outcomes for people of color, those who identify as LGBTQIA, and people at the intersection of these and other identities. Her most recent work sits at the nexus of mindful, intergroup dialogue and racial healing to explore avenues towards equity and justice. In this Dr. Gaynor's scholarship offers a critical analysis of the hegemony and argues against the normative assumptions embedded in the traditional theories and practice of public and nonprofit administration. As a co-founder of Praxis Matters, LLC, a consulting firm that supports organizations to meet their equity and justice goals, Tia pairs empirical knowledge with practical solutions to center equity within organizations. She has designed and delivered a host of trainings, executed equity-centered strategic plans, and conducted equity assessments. Dr. Gaynor brings with her more than 20 years of professional experience in nonprofit administration, research, and evidence-based curriculum development. Thank you for being here. Come on, Bio. That's all right. I know what you do. I want to read it all, okay? All right. Next up, we have Ashley Glass. Ashley is currently the founder and CEO of Black Women Cultivating Change, where she works to reduce the stigma of mental health in the Black community. Ashley is also a maternal mental health manager for Best Point Behavioral Health, where she is managing a project that will capture data in hopes to create a sustainable program that will meet the needs of mental health of mothers and some of the most vulnerable populations in Cincinnati. Ashley has a passion for health equity. She fell in love with mental health during her clinical rotation in nursing school and feels it is her mission to advocate, educate, and remove barriers for Black women. Ashley's signature quote is, "Life is not service level." I love it. Thank you. All right, and last but certainly not least, we have our gentleman here on the panel. I'm so happy to have a male perspective as well. So we have Jeremy Page. He is a 2012 graduate of Northern Kentucky University with a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Criminal Justice. He's also a graduate of Eastern Kentucky University with a Master's of Science degree in Criminal Justice, Policy, and Leadership. Jeremy is a proud member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity in native of Louisville, Kentucky, is passionate about criminal justice reform and believe that all Black lives matter. So thank you again to our panelists for being here. Give them a round of applause for their accomplishments, right? All right, so like I said, we're gonna have some images kind of scroll by to show you a little bit of the work while we have a very casual conversation about how racism impacts mental health. Bear with me, y'all. So I want to start out by giving a little quote that I found, and I think that that'll kind of set the tone of our conversation today. So Gilbert G., professor at UCLA in the Department of Community Health Sciences, and Annie Rowe, who's a professor at the University of California's Department of Public Health, depicts systemic racism as the hidden base of an iceberg. The iceberg's visible part represents the overt racism that manifests in blatant discrimination and hate crimes, explicitly racist treatment that may be relatively easy to recognize. The iceberg's face, like Titanic, it looked small and then it was crazy big at the bottom. The iceberg's face, the much larger portion, usually unseen part, represents systemic and structural racism. It consists of societal systems and structures that expose people of color to health harming conditions and that impose and sustain barriers to opportunities that promote good health and well-being. So I just wanted to make that statement again to kind of ground us in the conversations today, where we want to talk about the under part, right? The part that's hidden, the part that's less obvious, and how racism impacts mental health. So before we get going, you came right on time. That's okay. We are in flow today. Come on, we have Shamika Pope. Welcome. All right. So Ms. Shamika Pope, MSW, LCSW, LISW, is an assistant clinical professor for the Family Science and Social Work Department for Miami University, Ohio. Shamika previously served as Director of Guardianship for Montgomery County Probate Court. She is a trained mediator, elder mediator for elder care coordinator. As a guardianship director, Shamika developed and facilitated the court's education and supportive services for court-appointed guardians. Shamika developed the court's first social work internship program, where she served as field instructor for over 26 bachelor's and master's level social work students. She was invited to participate on a national task force commissioned by the American Bar Associate Dispute Resolution Section to develop the only elder abuse screening tool for elder mediation. Shanika is nationally certified mental health first aid instructor and teaches adults and youth mental health first aid in the community and many organizations within the state. Shanika is also a certified trauma 101 and QPR suicide prevention instructor. She is also a certified crisis responder with the National Organization of Victims Assistance, NOVA. Shanika is a certified anti-oppression informed practitioner. She has a BS degree in psychology and a master's of social work degree both in IUPUI. Prior to relocating to Dayton, Ohio in 2014, Shanika worked for over 22 years as a mental health therapist and crisis clinician for a community health agency. Shanika relocated to Ohio in 2014 and served as director of social service for a long-term care facility, giving her experience with individuals and families across the lifespan. Shanika previously served as associate work adjunct instructor for St. Clair Community College, Miami University, Oxford, and Xavier University, Cincinnati. Shanika currently facilitates Trauma 101, mental health first aid, suicide prevention, and various professional development workshops. Shanika is a proud mother of 3 beautiful adult children, Ashton, Shania, and Anaya. Let's give it up for Shanika. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for having me. So the way I decided to break this down was into 3 categories. So how racism impacts mental health from a clinical perspective, so I have my clinicians here. System and structural racism and its impact on health in the Black community, so I've got my systems people here in the middle. And then I wanted to talk about advocacy groups and what are they doing to make things better and what can we do as individuals. And so that's why I have my expertise down here on the end. So although I haven't broken up, I do want to encourage everybody to speak. I think there's a lot of overlap in the work that you do and the knowledge base that you have. So please jump in if something sticks out to you, okay? And I wanted to start from a clinical perspective because I feel like looking at my work, we're really focusing on the individual, right? So I kind of want to focus in on the individual and zoom back from a system, take a wide bird's eye view of what's happening. So I'll kick it off here with reflecting on the populations you serve. How prevalent is the issue of race related to overall mental health?
You guys hear me okay?
Yes.
It's extremely relevant. Every time we hear something in the news, every time we see something on social media, I promise you, it's someone sitting on my couch and we're having a discussion about it. And even outside of social media and things that we see on TV, the day-to-day experience that my clients are experiencing at work, at school, simply walking down the street. And I'm typically seeing the aftermath of all those things, which causes a lot of trauma. And with trauma comes those mood-altering symptoms. So that sadness, that anxiety, people not wanting to even leave their home. So those are a lot of things that I'm seeing.
Yeah, and the concept of trauma. So trauma wasn't a thing until the late 90s. And even how it came about, there was this huge study where there were 17,000 participants. Most of those participants were white, college-educated individuals. And so when you think about racism, that was not included in that original trauma study. So we have been not included from day one. And so when you look at screening tools, when you look at culturally relevant practices, none of that is at the table for Black and brown people, which often leads to misdiagnosis. Many of our young Black boys are diagnosed with ADHD when perhaps they're depressed or anxious. And so when you think about racism, it clearly impacts mental wellness. And until we get this idea of being culturally relevant, not necessarily competent, because I don't know that we can be competent in other people's cultures, but we have to, clinicians need to enter that space with humility, right? So how can I learn from my client? How can I center my client's voice? They're the ones experiencing the symptoms. Our textbooks may not always include the Black perspective. And so it becomes important for clinicians to understand how they need to enter that space, even with their expertise, but be humble to include the voice of those that they serve.
Thank you for that. What assessment tools do you use to evaluate trauma associated with race?
So there is no real tool, and that's the problem. So I don't work so much on the direct practice end. I support pre-service social workers. And so in my conversations in my classrooms, I am centering marginalized folks, Many clinicians are not clinicians of color, and so how do you center your whiteness or center your lack of perspective when you're working with vulnerable populations? And so there is no relevant clinical assessment. Many of our symptoms show up and are not considered. For example, young Black boys who present with depression many times are directed to correctional facilities and not necessarily mental health treatment facilities, so that's a problem.
Absolutely. How do you treat it? What are the treatment options if you have issues with mental health related to racism?
So I think that looks different for each individual. And also how their experience has impacted them. So individuals who have internalized racism, and so that's when individuals, Black and brown individuals, people of color, really start to believe those Eurocentric ideologies and values. My hair, I can't wear my natural hair to interviews. My nose is too big, my lips are too big. So we really look at identity issues and things of that nature. So really focusing in on that. And then if there is trauma, there's different modalities. So EMDR, if that's necessary. Trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. It really just depends on the individual and how they responded to those experiences, I think.
Thank you. Just thinking, there's so many places I want to go. Y'all have given me so much already. For your work in the community, how do African Americans respond to the idea of mental health?
Huge barrier. I supported students for 20 years, and I would have to battle with school administration because it became punitive. Either you get in treatment or you're suspended or expelled. And we don't do well when people tell us what to do, even if it's for our benefit. And so I had to do a lot of advocacy and education around why treatment would be important. And I think sometimes when you think about mental health treatment, you automatically think about medication. But it's a spectrum. There are so many ways to get mental health support. Sometimes it is medication, though. Sometimes it's therapy. Sometimes it's group therapy, a support group. Sometimes it's you engaging in physical wellness that supports your mental health. And so just really recognizing that treatment and healing is possible, but it's an individual journey that you have to actively participate in.
So how do we debunk the stigma of mental health in the Black community? How do we combat that?
I think for me, it's continue to show up. Continue to let people know that, hey, I'm here, I'm a Black clinician, and continue to plug my friends who are Black clinicians. I'm constantly, I actually had someone the other day ask me, why are you always promoting other people's mental health services? Because I'm not for everybody, one, and two, everyone else needs to know that it's not just me. There are other people who look like me, who look like you, who can serve you. So continue to show up.
And you all are booked busy. Black clinicians are booked and busy. Which is a blessing, right? I'm glad that Black clinicians are booked and busy, but it's hard to find one also. Even in my own mental health journey, recently I've opted to switch clinicians that had a better fit for me, but then trying to find the right fit for me that I felt like was culturally competent, right? and even in the Black community, right, that can look differently. So I love that you say that you're continuing to show up. Shanika, did you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would say to make mental health less clinical. So creating spaces like this where we bring this conversation to the community becomes important. Healing is possible, you know, and we have a shared experience, a collective shared experience as Black people. And I think it becomes important to shift that frame from just like surviving, right? And how do we stand on this idea of thriving as a community? Because we deserve that wholeheartedly. So I think bringing the conversation less clinically to the community, and then also the community getting involved, you know. So I teach a mental health first aid class. It's not clinically based. It's for the community person to recognize what signs and symptoms look like, because clinicians are booked and busy. But if I can be a community member to recognize when someone is experiencing a problem, I can be that conduit until help is really available. It begins in the community. It happens with us in the community. That's what I think.
I love that. And you know, that's something we're going to be focused on even more later, but I hope everybody in the audience really heard Shanika when she talks about for mental health first aid, is that correct? As far as places where you as an individual can help. Like, what can you do as an individual? There's so much systemic stuff that we're going to get into that may feel overwhelming, but that's something you can do. That's like a tangible thing. So hopefully, you know, later on, Shanika, if you can hang out if anybody is interested in getting some more information about our program, please to talk to her. So thank you for that. One more question in the clinical realm, and I think maybe this will help transition us into talking about more systems. So a growing number of researchers suggest that trauma can also cause profound biological changes that can be passed down to future generations. How does that statement contribute to the effects of slavery and systemic oppression? And I think we can dance back and forth here with that one. And I can read it again. Rewind. Okay, so a growing number of researchers suggest that trauma can also cause profound biological changes, and then that biological change is passed down to future generations. How does that statement contribute to the effects of slavery and systemic oppression?
So what you're speaking of is called epigenetics. That trauma and resilience is passed through our DNA.
And resilience.
And resilience, and it's both in, you know, and that's the narrative that we have to continue to push out, absolutely. We were enslaved people, but our ancestors did some incredible things, and those things and those seeds are planted within us as well. But when I think about this idea of passing trauma down, sometimes you don't know. You know, you have this reaction. I'll share a quick personal story. So a friend of mine is a legal gun-carrying individual, and he was maintenancing his gun, and I had this reaction to it, and I couldn't figure out. I didn't feel like he was putting my life in danger, but the presence of the gun shook me to my soul. About a year later, my mom was in town, and she shared this story of me as a 2-year-old coming down the stairs with a loaded gun, pointing this loaded gun as a 2-year-old. I do not recall this incident, but my body did. My body remembered the chaos. My body, I'm assuming, remembered just the high emotional responses. So when my mom, you know, shared what she did to my dad, you know, I didn't just fill in the blanks. But it wasn't until I learned that story that I was able to connect that emotional response to what actually happened to me. And I'm okay now. So that's what trauma is, especially if we experience trauma early on where we don't have vocabulary or our memory to support it. It's fragmented in our body. And that's what therapy comes into play. So.
Thank you. Anybody else want to tackle that question?
I mean, when I think about the biology piece and it being passed down through DNA, I immediately think of Black maternal health, right? Like, whether we're in Cincinnati or we're talking any place else, Black women have really detrimental experiences relative to their white counterparts as it relates to birthing children. I think about the prevalence or the overprevalence of fibroids in Black women, right? Like, and to what extent is that genetically passed down from slavery or all of these other kind of different stressors in the environment? And so it's important for us, like, and to your point, like, textbooks don't talk about the Black experience. Young OBGYNs aren't really focused on what the needs of Black women are. Why are we not studying what's bringing about fibroids, right? Why are we not studying these issues? And it's because, you know, we aren't seen in ways that allow us to be seen as human, and to be seen in ways that require for us to be, I don't want to say investigated, but for our issues to be researched in a similar kind of way, right? And so those are the things that I think we miss out on, and as a result, those issues get passed down from generation to generation.
Thank you so much.
And if I could just add, I mean, I think what Brandy is really talking about is the systemic nature of racism in medical education and training, right? Because medical professionals are not being trained on the experiences and the differences of people of color or people with identities that fall outside of the societal norm, right? And so that's a really great example of showing how racism is embedded within a system, right? So that's a great example of systemic racism because people aren't, like, white is treated as the norm, right? And so that's what the system of racism does. And so any identities that fall outside of that norm are considered abnormal, right? And so we have medical professionals, we have mental health professionals who don't understand the cultural context, who don't understand that intergenerational trauma that's present. They're not being trained on these things, and so they're behaving in ways that center whiteness, where Black women who want to carry successfully and have a healthy baby and have a healthy birthing experience, right, are not having that experience. And I think probably the most famous example of that is Serena Williams, right? Knowing that there was something wrong with her body and the medical doctors not listening to her, and she literally had to yell and force them to listen to her.
Thank you for that. So moving right into systemic and structural racism and its impact on the health of the Black community. I want to start out by asking, what are some of the ways that structural racism is reflected in the communities that you serve? I think you kind of touched on one community, but if you have any other examples you'd like to expand on?
So I'm currently reading a dissertation from a student at Rutgers Camden, and she's looking at the impact of murals on placemaking and neighborhoods with youth. And it's interesting because she doesn't, so in these conversations, they bring up violence a lot, right? And I can only imagine, like, the fluidity for which they're having these conversations is just matter of fact, and it's their norm, right? And so they're having to navigate all of these different things, in addition to the expectation that they are good students, that they are good community members, that they are good people, while on top of not having a way to process the violence that they're experiencing on a day in and day out basis, right? And when I'm talking about processing violence, it's like, you know, I'm reading these stories and they're like, oh, my friend got shot over here, or this is the place that, you know, I got beat up, or this is and it's just their life, and it's just matter of fact. And there's no place for them to go to figure out how to get the support they need, how to understand this trauma, and how for that trauma not to manifest in other aspects of their life and relationships, right? And so it's that kind of thing. I think about, you mentioned turning on the TV, right? Thinking about the fact that, like, every single day we're traumatized by January 6th. We're traumatized by police shootings. We're traumatized by the news and the media. Like, and it's the expectation that we just continue to go on. Like, I'm sorry that happened today, but, you know, 6 hours from now it's probably going to be more trauma, but you got work to do, right? Like, you got a family to take care of. These are things that, like, we've been conditioned to just deal with, particularly since COVID, right? Like, we haven't been able to process the trauma of loss the loss of the way things used to be, the loss of our families, the loss of our jobs, the loss of life, right? We just had to put our head down and keep going. And I think that is tremendously important for what does that mean for us 5 years from now, because we haven't been able to do anything with all that we have experienced in the last 2 years and just in this moment.
I think that's when, back to our clinicians, right? That's when therapy is important. Like, you know, I don't care who you are, what you look like in this audience. I think we have a lot to process. I think that therapy is necessary. Therapy is necessary. Let me say it again. Like, just for our well-being. So thank you for that. Regarding the criminal justice system, how have policies such as the 94 crime bill, stop and frisk, or feeding the prisons a pipeline impacted the Black community? And then, if you don't mind, if whoever tackles this, if you want to kind of explain what those 3 things are briefly, to just give some more context to the audience in case they don't know.
So I can start. Brandy does more policing work than I do, so I may look for her expertise. But I mean, those policies and practices that you talk about have devastated the Black community. The 94 crime bill was the 3 strikes law, which prescribed sentences for certain crimes, and as we all know, or maybe we don't all know, but the application of that crime impacted Black men, Black communities, and communities of color in disparate ways. And the sentencing for drugs and the categorization for drugs were different, right? So crack cocaine was categorized differently from powder cocaine. Crack cocaine carried harsher sentences than powder cocaine. White people were more likely to use cocaine, Black people were more likely to use crack, right? And so we can see these inherent disparities in the way in which the bill was created. Stop and frisk, I mean, it was determined by the courts that it was unconstitutional, but again, police were stopping, questioning, and frisking Black and brown men. I think New York City was the case for stop and frisk, right? And I think, of the database, maybe 1% of the people that they stop and frisk, they actually were able to match to a crime, right? So you are interacting and engaging with people in what I call the criminal legal system. We don't call it the criminal justice system because there's no justice in the system. But you're engaging these people in this system. They're becoming a part of this, like New York City police had a database, right? And when they were stopping and frisking people, they were comparing them against this database, right? So you were putting people in this system when they're literally trying to live their lives, right? And we also know what the description is. It's like Black male, 5'5" to 6'3", white t-shirt and jeans. That's everybody on the street, right? Like, and so to more directly answer your question, I mean, those policies have devastated the community. I mean, in addition to, the racial disparity of people who are incarcerated, I think Black men are 3 times as likely to be incarcerated as anyone else. It interrupts the community structure. Right? And so when you're talking about mental health, we're talking about racism, you're talking about systemic racism, and the fact that racism is embedded in the policies, racism is embedded in the way that we are training people who are working in law enforcement, the way that judges get their training, the way that probation officers and correctional officers get their training, right? And then we apply these laws in ways that are racially disparate, that impact Black communities, and then we're pulling these people out of these communities. We're housing them in private prisons where companies get paid for the number of people. I mean, it's this sad cycle that just persists, and we want to, as a society and as a political space, tell ourselves, right, the narrative. So my work connects to the narrative. So the narratives are, these are people doing bad things, right? Or these are bad people doing bad things, so they deserve to be where they are. But there's no investigation into how how embedded and how ingrained racism is in that system, right? And so your previous question, and I know I'm talking a lot, so I'm gonna stop, but your previous question was, like, where do we see racism in what we do? And racism is in everything. Literally, it's in everything. My best friend, who I love to death, said to me, like, everything's not about race. And I'm like, everything is exactly, like, literally everything. Education, healthcare, where we build roads, which roads we fix, where the grocery stores are, who has access to medical health. Like, literally everything is rooted in racist structures. And so when we're thinking about racism as a system, that iceberg metaphor, it's really important to understand that everything that we have in this country was built on a racist system. And I'm gonna stop.
No, I mean, you broke it down. Like, I had some more questions, and I think, like, you really explained the way that it infiltrates every single system. Thank you. Did anybody else want to add anything on that question?
Yeah, to add to that, when you think about those policies and how they broke up families. So I served young people in the late 90s, and many of my clients live with great grandparents because their dads or their moms, were connected to the criminal legal system because of drugs and the war on drugs. And so even children's services, about 5 years ago, I attended this training to add to my certifications. But I went through the training that child welfare workers go through. And every vignette, the client was a Black mom, and the helper was a white woman. Every last one of them. So I sent an email, and I said, imagine the seeds of bias that you're planting even in this training. You are training people to go into the homes, and you've primed them to see themselves as the helper and the Black person as the person who is not a great parent or a good parent, or unworthy of the support. And so it infiltrates that system as well.
Thank you.
So the only other thing I want to add to this conversation about the criminal legal system is we are coming up, and it's a midterm election. Elections are coming up. And the reality is that because Black people are disproportionately incarcerated, they also are likely to have lost their right to vote. Right? So if the conversation publicly is Black people don't vote. Well, for a lot of Black people, they can't vote, right? Because felony convictions really prevent you from being able to access that. We also need to think about the ways for which our communities have been gerrymandered. So even when we have a high concentration of Black people, Black and brown people in specific spaces, they diluted the ability for our voting power to really make a difference, right? And so all of these things are connected to the criminal legal system, and how we are stigmatizing people who have, through no fault of their own, happened to get stopped at the wrong time and dealing with the wrong officer, right? Because the reality is, to the earlier points, right? To Tia's earlier point, like, we can see the difference between the way Black people are treated and the way white people are treated in this country as it relates to law enforcement, right? Like, there's enough evidence out there. And so, it's important for us to connect those dots as well. It's not just about the impact on communities and families, but it also is thinking about the hypocrisy of democracy, right? Like, we talk about one person, one vote, but we're simultaneously taking that access away to so many groups of people in this country.
Yes, thank you for adding that in. So the last topic we're going to talk about, we want to bring some hope to things. What can we do, right? What can we do? What are some advocacy groups currently doing? What are individuals doing is kind of what we're going to move on to and talk about next. So what's the solution? What's the big answer? You guys got it, come on. So how can our institutionalized systems be reformed to improve the quality of life of African Americans and thus their mental health? I know what T is going to say. You said in our interview. T is a part of the exhibit too, and Randy. So make sure you check out her work.
Yeah, so I'm of the burn it down mindset.
Right.
I'm in the system, right? Like, I work in higher education, I work in predominantly white institution, I'm a part of it. And I'm like, I guess I'm going to try to burn it down when I'm in the house, because I just don't see how you can make change within an organization that's rooted in white supremacy and institutional racism. Like, I just don't see it, and I'm open to be convinced otherwise, but I am of the burn it down, let's start over.
I like it.
So my name is Jeremy. I don't think you got to meet me, but I work with the Bell Project, and what we do is we are working to end cash bail. So I manage the Cleveland and the Cincinnati sites, and just like you, I'm an abolitionist. I don't feel like our system can be reformed because it's set up to do exactly what it was set up to do. So there's no confusion there, but I think starting out is just doing the work that we're doing. We go into the jails. We speak with our clients face to face, and we understand what their needs are. Because the issue is not this instance of arrest, or this cycle of arrest, or this instance of untreated mental health, or whatever it may be. There's a cycle of it, so we need to get to the core of it, so that way we can treat the core issue, so that way we reduce recidivism and rearrest and those type of things, at least from a criminal justice perspective. But I think even for mental health or for system change, understanding like what the core issues are, and then abolishing them and changing them from there.
I was just going to say, and I don't know if I'm answering the question right, but my background is public health. So we think of prevention a lot, and so my thing is we need to be teaching the kids as they're growing up and giving them the verbiage. So a lot of people don't even know how to communicate what their symptoms are. They don't even know that they're in trauma or have experienced trauma. So my thing is, I think all teachers everywhere should be trained on trauma education, really all professionals, because everybody has dealt with some sort of traumatic experience, and it just needs to be ingrained everywhere. So if we start looking more in a preventative way, I guess is my take.
Absolutely. Like you said, education is key, which I'm learning so much through my master's program. Some of my classmates are in the audience, my professors in the audience, so thank you so much for coming. And I'm just really getting into the weeds of how crucial education is, how much of who determines what is learned is so crucial. So thank you so much for bringing up the point of education and giving language to children to really identify their feelings and work through them. Because unless we're burning it down, we're just going to have to keep working on it, right? Any other suggestions you have for the solutions?
I can just speak to, so with Black Women Cultivating Change, we try to do outside of the box types of mental health education. So we go out to the communities. We have mental health events at ours. So we're trying to meet the community where they are, not having them come to where we are, because I found a lot of times we'll have these events or even like discussions, but there's a lot of people that don't even feel comfortable coming to the museum center. So there's a lot of people that needed to hear this conversation today, but they don't, feel that this is a safe space for them. So we're trying to really just bring that education and everything to the community so we can reach more people.
Thank you for sharing that.
I would just add one other piece to that, which would be the access to these events. I think access is a big barrier to events. I know in Cincinnati, or not events, just services, organization, and advocacy. So I'm sure that they could probably be across the nation, but our people don't know about the services, like even with me being with the Bell Project. I'm doing it by word of mouth and posting on social media, but there's not systems in place, I think, to really amplify like the good work that all of us are doing. They're trying, especially trying to reach our community. So just trying to find better ways to make that access available for everybody.
Absolutely. One last question. What mental health resources, and I think you guys have already provided some, so if there's any other mental health resources you can suggest for those whose socioeconomic status cannot afford the cost of mental health care? Where can we go? What can we do? Sounds like maybe the first aid, community health is one. Any others?
So many of your county alcohol, drug addiction, mental health services board may offer free services. So in Montgomery County, we offer free mental health first aid. We offer free trauma 101. We also offer free QPR, which is a suicide prevention program, because suicide has landed in our Black community. It's been here, but we're not talking about it. And so you can go to the website. Some of the services are virtual, so you may not have to drive down to Dayton. But you can also check in the counties where you live, because the goal is to try to get the information out there. And access is something that, agencies recognize as a problem. And your primary care physician, it begins there too. So when you go see your doctor and you talk about your body ache, talk about your soul ache as well. Be honest with those questions, because now they're asking any life, altering events. They're asking those questions, so that's your end, right?
Thank you for adding that primary care. I think that's not something people often think of. You talk so much about your physical when you're in your primary care doctor, so thank you for that.
I was going to say, I've used it. It's called the Loveland Foundation. So you can fill out a form, let them know that you want to seek therapy, and they will actually pay for your therapy sessions. So they pay for up to 8 therapy sessions for me, and then when you end, they'll give you 4 additional ones free of cost. So,
And can you choose your therapist?
yes, and you can choose your therapist.
What?
Is that only for, what is it, Hamilton County?
No, I think the Loveland Foundation is a national organization. So.
Thank you for sharing that resource. So Ashley, I don't know if you're able to stick around, but if anybody has any additional questions about that resource, please do share. That's amazing. Yes, please.
And most employers have EAP programs where they offer free therapeutic services as well. So it's just as simple as reaching out to your HR department to see if that's something offered to you.
Thank you.
So I've used Mental Health of America. They're located in North Kentucky and Hamilton County, but they offer 3 free pro bono therapy services, so it's covered. And it's through, I think they use UC and they do like students for it, but if you don't have to access, it's free and it's free.
Awesome. So we've got resources here. So if you're looking for resources, I believe our panel can stay just a little bit longer afterwards, and please engage them and get whatever resources that you need. One thing I do want to mention is NAMI of Urban Greater Cincinnati, who sponsored this project. They're right over here in that corner. So again, if you're looking for, yes, please give them a round of applause. If you're looking for additional resources, that's who you can talk to. NAMI provides advocacy, education, and support and public awareness so that all individuals and families affected by mental health can build better lives. They are started as a small grassroots organization, and they're dedicated to building better lives for millions of Americans affected by mental health. So that's another resource for you. So again, please.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is wonderful. This is wonderful, and you all provided such good information. But when we talk about NAMI, it's not just the people who are living with mental illness, it's also for their families and the people around them. And here in Cincinnati, and we're located in the hood, and you know anything about Cincinnati, they're on Woodward Avenue in Blair. Across from the little market there on the corner is where all the people hang out and do their business, but not in my place. But,
thank you. But we provide family-to-family, family-to-family training for family members to learn how all about mental illness. We give that information to everybody. We also provide a family support group meeting. Lasts for 1 hour on Mondays at noon, and for 1 hour on Thursday evenings. We will be going back to holding our monthly conversations, so I'll probably get some of you all information from all of you who are close by and have you come and speak individually to people, to groups. We work with NAMI Ohio Youth Move, working with young people. Oh, by the way, a week from today at noon, we will be holding our annual membership event. And hopefully all of you will be able to come. Hopefully you will. It'll be a luncheon, and we'll have some great panel. Now, it won't be a panel discussion, but we'll have some great speakers and a couple of videos to tell you all about us and what all we do. We touch a whole lot of souls.
Thank you, Gloria. Put a round of applause for NAMI of Urban Greater Cincinnati. And Gloria, hopefully you can stick around for a little bit too. Again, if you're looking for any resources or more information about what NERMI does, please do have a conversation with Gloria. So we've got just a few more minutes. I want to open the floor to questions. If anybody has any questions, comments, thoughts. And Marche is going to walk the mic around town.
Unless you got a big voice to scream.
Yeah, and I'll repeat the question too for recording. So. Oh, my faces came out and really looked out. Hey, y'all.
Hey, how's everyone?
Hey.
I just had a question specifically for the clinicians, right? How do you provide therapy for 20 years or however long you've been providing the services? And to kind of touch Brandy's point, there's so much that's happened just in the last few years, and you're having to process your own experiences, your own traumas, and I imagine this space where people come in back to back to back to back to back and just unload and unload and unload, and you have to help them kind of sift through it. When do you have time to sift through your own stuff? I mean, how is that possible?
I'm sorry, repeat again. Well, you had the mic, so you got it. Go ahead.
Great question. I'm glad you asked that because I was going to say, you guys can be kind to our providers out there. So biggest thing is self-care. I know we hear that all the time, getting your nails and getting your hair done, but taking days off. My friends tell me all the time about my schedule, so it's just making sure that I'm taking days off for myself. But also, I just said something about my friends. My friends are like my go-to. I see one out there right now. Just being able to have the space to debrief or being able to have a space to just be myself and not have to be in work mode is something that I need for myself. So self-care, making sure I'm taking days off and not carrying everything that's being dumped on me, and then just utilizing my support system. That's how I manage everything.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would say that I always offer myself a healing dose of grace. I'm human, and I have feelings, and I feel with my clients, I feel with my community. But how I manage that is with peer consultation, so I'll reach out to a fellow clinician. I'll reach out to my own therapist. I have a therapist, which is interesting because in our community, even when people learned that I had a therapist, the question was why. So let me say this to you. If you learn someone that you love has sought wellness for themselves, the question should never be why, but how can I support you?
I want to say, can you say that again? No, because I think that's like super important. I think, even in some of my interviews, one thing I remember really distinctly, so one girl was sharing how she went to therapy and her mother was supportive of therapy for other people, but she felt really personally insulted that her daughter was seeking therapy for herself, so.
Yeah, and so I'm going to be a little transparent. So it was my family, and what was said to me was, your mother is such a strong example. You have that strength. And I was like, well, I don't want that strength all the time. I want to be soft. I wanted to be able to put it down. I had a right to put it down, and so I'm really speaking up. And so my wellness is my own personal business. And I need to mind my business so that I'm able to support the people that I'm supposed to support.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was a great question, Michael. Any questions? I think we got a question from Gloria.
No, we got one more.
Oh, sorry. Yes, hey.
Hi. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me? This question is kind of directed towards Asha, and being an art educator. How do you see art's role in this landscape of both the exposing and processing and the therapeutic aspect? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think art makes things approachable. I think that people approach art typically with curiosity. And I think that's kind of like the gateway, and I think that's the special magic about art, that people are curious, so they want to engage the work. They want, I hope, right, want to have conversations about the art. And then, just speaking from my own personal experience, how therapeutic art has been for me, just being still and creating about the things that are bothering me has been such a release and so healing. So that's something that I always try to bring to others, something that I strive to do in my art education career. So the fact that art is approachable and that expressing your feelings through your hand, that tactile expression, I think it's just so therapeutic.
Yeah, two things I want to point out. I know it's not overlooked, I think you covered it, but I just want to emphasize, one of them is as you talk about racism, there is racism in the research being done for the medications that we are getting. It's not just those medications, those
Psychotropic, maybe?
Well, anyway, it's not just medications they give you that are given for mental illness, but throughout all of the medicine area, that's a problem, and that's because we're not really part of that. Our bodies are different. We probably have a whole lot of different DNA, but if we can get more people involved in the research. And people say, well, that's going to make me, use me for a guinea pig. But you're already being used for a guinea pig because you're taking medications that were never really intended for you. The second thing I want to say is when we talk about changing the system, yeah, you can blow it up, but then what you got? You got to start over from the beginning. I think that you can make major changes by getting involved in the major communities, on their boards, and everything that the state has to offer, any committees that you can be on. Because if we're not at the table, the decisions are being made without our input. And so many of us have never sat on a board, never sat on a committee, and people seem to think it takes a whole lot of your time. But just having your needs at the table keeps you from being on the table and being able.
All right, we're going to take one last question before we wrap up for the day, maybe two. One or two.
So my question is for you, Asha. As we've recently seen, more and more of our art has been censored. We have been shut down. It's like they want to give us a space, but they really don't want to give us the space. So how can we support you and other artists to make sure that not only your work, but your voices are heard, so that we can continue to have these authentic conversations?
Oh, that's a great question. So, trying to sum it up. How do we support myself and other artists who are trying to have conversations about maybe some of these tough things, these racial things, where some institutions may not be as supportive of that, if I captured that well? Okay, great. I think show up, right? You all showed up today, and that is huge. Show up and then go tell a friend. Go tell them what you heard today. Go tell them what you learned through the art. Promote other artists. I'm big on social media promotion, but there's tons of ways that you can promote the people that you know and the work you do. There's so much talent here in Cincinnati. So yeah, share, promote the work. I think that's some of the big things that we can do, and share the message. Like that is the part that is so key. So I hope that one thing that all of you all do is go tell a friend. Go tell one friend about things you learned here today, something that really impacted you. And I'm gonna be real frank here, I'm gonna call out my non-people of color. Like, I want you to tell people about this show. I want you to tell them what you've learned, so that we can, to me, art changes the hearts and minds of people because of its ability to be approachable. So I hope that helps things.
I'll just add to that. I would say collaboration is a big thing. So if you have a business or whatever space that you're in, collaborate. I think that's a big thing that we need to do in our community and come together. So if you have a business or if you have something that you got going on, call on other artists, because I think collaboratively we can change things and move things and come together. So I just wanted to add that. But we got one more.
Thank you.
There's a
do it. I mean, honestly, I was of the mindset that I didn't need rest until, like, your body's gonna force you to rest anyway. So, if I've not learned anything since the pandemic, is that when you die, these institutions will replace you as quickly as you can, right? And so you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to take care of yourself. Rest is important, but rest is resistance, right? Like in that ministry on Instagram or social media has really been the choir to me, right? Like they've been speaking language that I was resistant to, just because capitalism says you have to work in order to be productive and you need money and all these things. But the NAP ministry has been amazing, and I value naps now in a different kind of way, right? Like it's important. So, but do it.
And I just wanted to add, so Toni Morrison has this quote, and I'm not going to get the quote right because it's long, but she talks about how racism serves as a distraction, right? So the purpose of racism is to distract you from doing real work and taking care of yourself, right? And so to go back to that point of rest, we can't fight these isms, to Brady's point, right? Unless we're whole, unless we have tapped into our whole selves, unless we're healthy, unless we are of a sound mind, and unless we are rooted in our own well-being. And so, I am a firm believer in setting professional and personal boundaries. And so some of the tools that were highlighted for the clinicians, I think that even if you're not a clinician, you can borrow from them, right? And our mental health and our well-being is not just having a formal diagnosis. It's being able to live fully and being able to be authentic and being able to have the energy to do the things that we want to do. Like, if we're too tired to enjoy life, like, what are we doing, right? But that's what racism is designed to do. It's designed to keep us from being tired, to experience joy. We should be able to experience all the joyful things that life has to happen. And if joy is a nap, take a nap, right? We have this culture that suggests that this hustle life is the thing. Like, I'll sleep when I die. Like, nah, like, I don't want to sleep now and wake up and have some fun, right? And so I think it's really important for us to set boundaries and to take naps if we want to nap, and to tell people no to things that might even be of interest to us, but it's like, this is not a good time. I can't take one more thing on.
Thank you. That's a perfect kind of close to our conversation. The last question I asked in all of the interviews that I conducted was, how do you find joy to combat the impact of racism on your mental health? And I think when you go see the exhibit, as much as you'll hear people talk about some of the trauma and the pain, you're going to hear a lot of joy too. So please, if you haven't already, go up and check out the exhibit. It's in the Shift Gallery. Again, I want to thank our panel today. You guys were good. The work that you do, thank you for showing up today. Thank you. I want to thank all of you all for attending. You could have been anywhere in the world today, but you decided to be here with me, and I thank you for that. I want to again thank our project sponsors. I want to thank Arts Waves, Black Art Speaks, and NAMI of the Urban Creator Cincinnati for your support. This project could not have happened without you. The goal of my project is to create better cross-cultural understanding of the links between racism and mental health, and begin the process of healing the Black community as we speak true to our experiences. So I hope that this panel, along with the art, continues the conversation, assists in changing hearts and minds, and encourages us to work towards systemic change. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
And thank you, Asha, for doing all of this.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yo, I just want to say, please, everybody, give a standing ovation for Asha. Standing ovation. You deserve it. You're going to be enough to have a wonderful life. You deserve everything.